Do you know who your spirit guides are? Do you know how to communicate with them? If you answered no or not really to either of these questions, then this episode is for you. The reality is that we all have at least one spirit guide at any given time, and we do have the ability to channel information from them on a daily basis. So, if you are looking for ways to connect, to communicate with your guides, we're going to be talking about that today, as well as what are spirit guides and how can we work with them. So, merry meet, I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and I am here tonight talking all about spirit guides. If you are joining us live, feel free to leave some questions and comments in the chat. I'll be watching the chat as we go. And let's dive right in. We'll have a Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is talk about what is a spirit guide, and we'll talk about the various different types of spirit guides, and then we'll dive deeper later on in the episode into ways that you can connect to them. So, the first type of spirit guide that many of us have are the ancestral guides. And I think that it's a good place to start because, as witches and spiritually minded people, we talk a lot about ancestors, especially around Samhain. It ends up being the bulk, can be the bulk of our work around that time of the year. And so, it is something that's easy for people to connect to. Now, the ancestral guides, because of their connection to us ancestrally, they're always there, and they are have this unique ability to help us break through ancestral trauma that we may be carrying, any ancestral baggage or burdens or limiting beliefs that were coming from our family lines. So a lot of times what people will find is that when they're doing, like, let's say they go to someone who is a channeler, for example, they'll find that the person will channel guides and their guides will come forward and speak. And a lot of times these are the ancestral guides that come through because they are so close to us and so near our auric field. Now they know the patterns that we need to break because they know the patterns that they needed to break as well. And so for that reason, they can be so good when you're having, like I said, like limiting beliefs or different ancestral trauma that you need to break through. So you can use those guides to understand the generational pattern, where it began, how you can help work through it in your own incarnation here. And you really, they're a good place to start is simply by asking an ancestral guide, what is this? Where did this pattern come from, or what do I need to work on here? Um, and the other thing too, and to mention, is that a lot of times channelers will say that when they have someone that they're reading for, and and that person is sitting there and the guides are coming through, that a lot of times these guides are guides from a long time ago, many generations ago, and the person will say, well, I don't even know that great 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 grandfather or great 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 grandmother. But the reality is that those are often the guides that come through. They're not always the ones we would think, which would be people that we knew in life who had crossed over. So, always good to kind of debunk some of the myths about it. A lot of today will be talking about, what some of the things that we perceive a spirit guide should be and what the reality is. And that can sometimes be the blockage that people have is they're expecting one thing, and so they're actually missing what's coming through. So just pausing to say hi to some who are joining us in the chat. I see Amy's here. Hi, Amy and Melinda. Hi, everybody. So we're going to continue talking about different types of guides. So after the ancestral guide, we also have the spirit animals. I think that fits into this category as well. Because again, our guides are simply just those who, kind of come through and talk to us. So the other thing I should mention too is that when we incarnate into this earth, we incarnate in with at least one guide, and that number is usually more. In fact, I was just listening to a podcast earlier today from a channeler who said that, like, in reality, she believes that people have like hundreds of different guides, and we may not be able to connect to all of them at once, and some of them are are there for very specific purposes that perhaps we're not even at yet. But she believes that we have many, many, many. So the reality is we all have them. We all incarnate with at least one, and that at least that very first guide, the purpose is to help us with our soul contract to stay on track with our spiritual progress. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, how we can kind of set intentions and ask questions to receive the answers we need to know about our life path and our life purpose. But getting back to the second type of guide, the spirit animal guide. So many people find that they connect to guides through the animal kingdom. And these can be messengers who bring in messages for us, or they can also just be a way that our own spirit guides can utilize um, the animals in order to bring the messages through. Um, so what you really want to do is look for animals that you have some kind of a special affinity toward, and it doesn't have to be something that you've always loved since you were a child. It could be an animal that pops up at any given time. So we are going to talk a little bit later when we talk about the ways to communicate. We'll go back to this again. We're going to talk about how an animal could come through and deliver messages to us. But at least for now, just as we're going through the types of guides, know that an animal spirit can absolutely be a type of spirit guide. Now, another type of spirit guide are the helpers from the astral plane. So, another misconception is sometimes that people think that our guides are only our ancestors. Sometimes people are surprised to learn that ancestors can be guides, and then sometimes people are surprised to learn that there are other types. So there can be guides who come from the astral plane, and like I was mentioning, that channeler that I was listening to the podcast from, she was saying she does this meditation where she takes people into like a football stadium to introduce them to their guides, and the idea of using that kind of metaphor is to show us the great scope of how many there could be. So these guides who are coming from the astral plane, you might use the word angels. If you, I would say that angels could fall into that category if that's the word that you use to describe them. Angels are absolutely spirit guides. They can also be ascended masters. So the idea here is that these are usually not necessarily people who have lived recently in this plane, kind of like our ancestors, even ancestors like your great 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 grandmother only goes back a couple hundred years. So these ascended masters and the angels, at least the ascended masters, if they lived on Earth, that's kind of the idea of them being an ascended masters. At one point they lived on Earth and then they had ascended and they no longer come here, but they stay around the earthly plane in order to deliver messages and help guide people. And so I really was newer to this concept until about I guess it would be like early last year. I went to a psychic fair and I decided to have my aura read. I'd never had it read before. And when the woman was reading the aura, she was talking about, all the things like the different colors and what they could mean about my personality and where my energy is. But she's also started pointing out, see here, this is an angel and this is an angel. And then she said, and this one right here, this one is a guide. And so she was differentiating between those two. And then she starts talking about, and she laughs, and she's obviously, she's channeling information that I can't hear. And so I guess she's hearing him. And she says, his name is Ralph, and he's this big, burly kind of guy. She said he looks like he's from like ancient Tibet or something like that. And he wants to know why you don't listen to him. And I said to her, because I didn't even know he was there. And this was the first time of kind of discovering this extra being that had been around me. And she said, well, he's been here for a long time and his role is to help you stay on your spiritual path and kind of maintain your soul contract and find your true path and what you're meant to do here on this earth and this incarnation. And she said, and then here's the thing: is we could have easily disregarded that. Like any of this stuff, we could um, we could disregard it as just being nonsense, right? But then she said he wants to know why um, you're always driving distracted. And that really hit me because I do feel like I drive distracted, and I don't think that's something that every single person does, but it hit me because it had been something I'd been thinking about. I play Pokemon Go, and I keep the phone in the car when I'm driving home, but there's this inclination to kind of like I try not to touch it, but I'm looking at it, I'm doing things, and I feel like that's what he was talking about. And she's like, yeah, he's like has to put in extra work to kind of keep you keep you okay when you're driving that way. And he says like, just kind of knock it off. And so I thought that was really kind of eye-opening to me, and to me it added this extra validity into him being truly there. So we'll talk a little bit later when we talk about ways to connect. We'll talk about a little bit later what I did to kind of communicate with him. But that is my story of kind of having a ascended master or a guide from the astral plane. Um, and then I think we also should talk about the higher self. So sometimes people will say that the spirit guide is the higher self, and we could certainly make a case that these messages are coming from the higher self. And I think at the end of the day, it really has to do with your views on kind of the essence of the universe. So our higher self is the part of us that does connect to what's outside of us. Ultimately, it's the part that connects to our spirit guides and is able to bring in the messages, hear them, interpret them. That is the higher self. So, are the guides and the higher self the same thing? Again, it kind of depends on your perspective, because if you think that all things are one, then technically we're all just one, right? Our guides and us and the higher self, all of it is one thing. But if we think that they're unique energies, then it would be our higher self that allows us to access the information from these beings who are not here in this plane with us. And so I think, as a witch, it's absolutely possible for both of these to be true. Like we are all at one, all we are all one at the end of the day. And so me, you, the guides, everything is all just kind of the same thing. We're learning how to tap into like that aspect of ourselves. But at the on the other perspective, there's times when it makes more sense to have all of our energies be separated, and then here we are, and we're working on us, and we're working with these guides outside of us. So it's the patriarchal conception of time and being and everything that tells us that things have to be black or white or either or, and they don't. These are just two different ways of looking at it, both of which are true, and both of which make sense depending on where we are in the experience. So probably for most of us, it makes more sense to kind of separate ourselves from the guides. But there will be moments of kind of unity and the expanded consciousness where we feel like we're all the same. So those are kind of different spirit guides that we might encounter. And so now what we want to do is talk about how would we connect and how would we communicate. And just saying hi to some more who are joining us. I see Sonia's here in the chat, and then Tom is here, and he was saying this is something I asked about earlier. Yeah, and we've had a lot of people have been asking for this episode, and that's why I decided to put it together for us now. A lot of people have been asking about it recently. And then Kelly said she's sure her guides are thoroughly frustrated with her. And here's the thing is like, I don't know if you were on when I was telling the story about the channeler and my guide Ralph, but um, I don't think she got the sense or I got the sense that he's necessarily frustrated. I think like our guides are kind of like they get it. It can take us several incarnations to figure things out. This is why we carry things from life to life to life, and many of the journeys and the work we're doing extends over lifetimes. So, yeah, they may be like, why don't you get it? It seems like you should be getting it, but they also have great patience with us too. So, So how do we connect? And I think that's really the biggest question that most people have is like, do I have guides? And the answer is yes, we all do. At least one. And like I said, that person I was listening to the podcast from she says we have many, 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 many guides. But how do we connect? How do we communicate? So the biggest hurdle, and if you go and you listen to people who talk about spirit guides, everybody brings this one up. It's the biggest one, and it is going to be our self-doubt. And the sad part is it's the hardest one to work on. So just like anything in our spiritual path, there's not usually going to be some kind of a quick fix to this. So like I don't have a tip to share for you that's going to help you, just like, oh, I couldn't see my guides or talk to them and now all of a sudden I can. It's a process, just like all of this. Like when we're on the path, it's a process of how we get there. But I promise you, if you listen to what I'm going to say here and you try a few of these things, it does work. This is how it worked for me, because several years ago, I would not be giving this talk. I would be listening to it because I had no connection to guides at all. I thought I thought there's something wrong with me, but I made some big shifts in my life, and that's how things changed for me. So self-doubt is the big one. So really what it comes down to is, do we know the difference between what is a thought in our heads and what is coming from the guides, a message is coming from the guides. And so what this does is it creates so much confusion and so much doubt in us that we become the hurdle that gets in our way. We become the blockage to our own growth. So what we really have to do is build our spiritual self-esteem. So just like anything in your life, you have to build self-esteem around it. Some people are innately born with it. So there are absolutely people who are innately born just with high self-esteem in all areas of their life, or like maybe in their career or something like that. We all know those people. And there's other people who have to work at it. So same thing goes in the spiritual world. There are some people who are born gifted, and just open as soon, from day one, they could communicate to with their guides. And we are not necessarily all like that. For the majority of us, we're not. Okay, so we will have to learn how to communicate. And a lot of times too, it's about us being able to kind of let go of preconceived notions about how it should be, like thinking that we have to be like that person who is just so naturally good at it. That can be a hurdle in and of itself, because it can be a work in progress for us. So um, so for most of us, our spiritual self-esteem is quite low. A lot of this has to do with like the way we were raised, the culture that we're in, the collective that kind of doesn't believe in magic, really says, I got to see it to believe it, that kind of stuff. We're all kind of plugged into that collective. And so we're coming through here with those limiting beliefs and those self-doubts. But if we can strengthen our spiritual self-esteem, then we are going to see a big shift in our lives. And that's what I ended up doing. So you really have to kind of set an intention. So like we need our belief, and then we need to set an intention. And we set the intention that you are going to try and foster this in yourself. Like you're going to work on trusting yourself. And in particular, you're going to work on trusting yourself when it comes to your guides. So setting that intention, as simple as that sounds, setting it every single morning when you get up. I am going to be open and receptive to my guides. And you do it the next morning. I am going to be open and receptive to my guides, and you do it the next morning. And don't expect immediate shifts. They can come, but if we could suspend kind of like manage our expectations, suspend our expectations about how it should be, just put the intention out there every day, and eventually things start to shift for you. And then what you want to do is really give yourself permission to do all of this, because what is going to happen is, even if we set the intention, messages kind of start coming through, and then you block them by saying, oh, that's in my head, I'm making it up, all the different things, the stuff that goes on and on and on, the limiting beliefs in your mind, and you start saying all those things. So when you see yourself in that place, you're going to pause. You can even imagine like a big stop sign in your head stopping you. Look, stop. I am actually working on this right now. And this where I'm questioning myself, all this self-doubt is not going to help me. So stop and then kind of go back to what you're doing. Give yourself permission. Push through those feelings, and let them kind of wait at the wayside, and just trust in yourself. And so what you'll notice is maybe not the first time or the second time or the third time, maybe the 25th time, things start to shift. And for me, when I did this, it took a lot. Like, it was like, I'd be like, I'm in it, I'm doing it, I'm going to be working with my guides, I'm setting intentions, I'm trusting, and then here come all the limiting beliefs flooding in, and stop, start over. I'm setting my intention, I'm trusting myself, and you have to do it over and over and over. But eventually, what you'll notice is the doubts start to quiet, because no one is listening to them anymore, or at least they're getting negated every time. They're getting stopped. And so what we let kind of roll through our mind just persists. But if we keep shifting our attention away from the doubts, eventually they get quiet. There's no one listening. So you just remind yourself as you're doing this, why you're doing it, and that it's hard, it can be hard, and you just kind of push through it, and then you continue. And like, it seems very simple, but it absolutely works. It can be a real game changer for you if you will try this. Eventually, you'll notice that your doubts just kind of begin to drop off and fade away. Now, here's also kind of a myth buster, too, because we don't talk about this a lot. So, a lot of times people think that they're the only one who's not connecting to their guides. But when I put out questions about like what's getting in your way, people are always talking about self-belief. I can't hear my guides. I don't know where they are. And you'd be surprised how many people say this. So I know that it's not just you, and I know it wasn't just me back then when I was going through it. So just know the reality is that most people, unless they're kind of innately born with this gift in the very beginning, like we all have it, but some of us have to work on it. But unless they're innately born with it, most people have the same doubts as you do. But the difference between the people who kind of go on to be able to connect to their guides and those who don't is that the ones who connect to them, or eventually are able to, are the ones who pushed through it. They negated it and they kept working on it, so that eventually they had undeniable spiritual experiences. Like, eventually you can't explain it away anymore, because they happen more and more and more. So I'll share more as we talk about ways to connect in a little bit. I'll share more about my story, of believing in myself, and how this came to be. But those are generally the people who end up with those authentic experiences. Those are the ones who worked on it. Um, okay, so let us then let's kind of shift over into the intention. So I already kind of briefly mentioned this. Working on our self-belief is important, but also kind of setting that intention is also important. So what you can do is you can do this one of two different ways, or you could do both. And the first one, you'll set an intention early in the morning when you wake up, that today I will be open and receptive to hearing what comes from my guides. And then another thing you can do is at the end of the night, you can set an intention. I will be open and receptive to hearing what comes from my guides during my sleep and during my dreams. Now, so let's pause here on the dreams one. So if you are going to kind of do it at night, what I would recommend doing, especially, I would recommend this for anybody, but especially somebody who says they don't really remember dreams, is just have some paper nearby the bed. And when you wake up, just sort of jot down the first thought that's in your head. So even if it's not remembering a dream, just like what thought is in your head. Are there any feelings? Are there any emotions that you're experiencing right then? And they may not make sense right away, but jot it down anyway. If you are somebody who remembers a dream, then jot that down too, because you can go back later and look and see what was kind of coming through. And what you may find is that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but over night after night after night, there's a pattern in what's coming through as well. Now, like I mentioned, you could set the intention in the day as well, that I'm open and receptive to my guides today. And then feel free to also ask questions, because remember, or specific questions, I should say, because remember in the beginning, I talked about how we at least have one or more guides who kind of comes into the life with us to help keep us on the right path, to kind of help guide us. Even if we veer off, they're still there. And so you can ask questions like, what's the next step for me in order to fulfill my purpose or my soul contract? What is my soul contract? You can actually ask these specific questions. What do I need right now the most? Who do I need to meet? Because perhaps there's someone in this life that's going to aid you in the next part of your path. What limiting beliefs do I need to release around my soul purpose or my direction? And so feel free to ask questions that you want to know about. Just know that it's not always an immediate response. And like I said, it can take time. But then the next step is, after we ask questions, learning how to listen. So this is where we will release expectations about how we think the guides should look, how we think they should sound, what we think they should say, all of it. Every little last bit of what we think it should be, we let go of that and we try to be as open and receptive as we can be. And then they'll have space in order to communicate with us. So, for most people, the talking to a guide is not like a direct back and forth conversation like you would have with a friend. It can be, and snippets of it can happen, but a lot of times it's not long. It's not long in duration. And so that's where like kind of releasing our expectations can happen. Now believe me, it absolutely can transpire that way. You can have a full-on conversation with a guide like that, but just release that expectation because it doesn't have to be that way. So your guides are already talking to you. They're talking to you right now, whether you know it or not. And so here are some ways that we can connect to them that will kind of aid us, and just other ways to sort of be open and receptive. So the first thing is simply thoughts in our heads. So a thought in your head can be yours, and it also can be coming from your guides, your higher self, a combination of the guides and higher self together. And so usually what will happen is when a thought is coming through that is not your own, that's coming through from a guide, it's usually something that you wouldn't think yourself. It's never going to be self-deprecating for sure. And it's usually going to be something kind of novel, like it'll pop into your head out of the blue and doesn't seem totally connected to what you're thinking about at that time. So that would be one kind of indication that maybe this particular thought that's coming through is from a guide, especially if you've already set the intention and you're kind of like intentionally working through this. Now, another way that you can tell sometimes whether a thought that's coming through is yours or from a guide is that the perspective of the thought changes. So most of the time, when our internal kind of monologue is in the first person, so it's a lot of I, right? And many times guides will come through and it will be in the second person. It will be a lot of you. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to be, but it is a good indication. Like when you hear the kind of perspective shift in the language, it's a good indication that that is a guide, at least influencing the thought. Now, if we could strengthen our self-belief, like we talked about, that is also going to help kind of strengthen our ability to not get like distracted by the questions. Is it real? Is it not real? So an example, I actually shared, I think it was last week or the week before. Can't remember which one it was, but I shared a story about when I bought my house and how I was looking at all these. We were looking at all these different houses for a long period of time, and I was kind of panicking. And then there was this one day I was driving home and I had this thought in my head and it said, "Stop worrying. Your house is not on the market." So see that shift, that you're in the midst of all of my like I worries was the indication that that was actually a spirit guide. Now we could call that claircognizance. I do call that claircognizance, but also remember that it is our it's our clair senses that are actually picking up all the messages anyway. So your guides will use your claircognizance, your clairvoyance, your clairaudience, whatever clairs are stronger in you, they will use those to send messages through as well. So that particular message, for those who heard the rest of the story, I negated it. Even though I heard it, I negated it. And in fact, it said your house is, you'll get your house on 10/22, 10/23 is what it said. And then we ended up putting an offer on a house on that exact day. And then they approved it the day later, 10/23. So it's like, but the message had come through weeks and weeks and weeks earlier prior to that. And I said in the other episode, like, think about all of that energy that I could have spared myself, all the worry that went on for those weeks and weeks and weeks if I just listened. So, kind of a powerful example, but that is how guides can speak to us through our thoughts. Now, um, other ways that we can pick up messages are through things that we can actually do to try to facilitate a conversation. So, for example, automatic writing is a possibility. So with automatic writing, we usually try to become very relaxed and receptive, and you allow your body, your hand, to channel messages that are coming through. So when people are first starting out with automatic writing, I usually tell them put the pen in your non-dominant hand, because there's a lot of muscle memory in the dominant hand. You're always writing with this hand, and so it's more aligned to your own identity. But if you put it in the non-dominant hand, we've got a better chance at accessing kind of more unconscious things. So it's a good way to do like inner child work. You can write a question to your inner child in the right hand or your dominant hand, and then write the answer, like whatever's coming through with the non-dominant hand. But the spirit guides can also be connected to this way. So again, I've got to suspend the doubt, because there's going to be that voice that's going to come through and be like, well, that's just you. You're just making it up. And you have to suspend that voice and just say, I'm not listening to it right now. It's not helpful. It's not going to be helpful in the work that we're doing. I'm going to suspend that voice. I'm going to push it away for the moment and just focus on what we're doing, which is the automatic writing. But what I do when I'm doing automatic writing is I just try to get my hand really receptive, and I just sort of let the pen just write and not second guess what's there. And at the end of it all, it may not make a lot of sense. That's okay. I keep the papers, just like we talked about with the dreams and things, like when you're waking up. Keep all the notes of like kind of messages that are coming through, because they may not make sense at first, but over time they will. Um, and then also they can be powerful. That can be powerful validation too. So because at first you don't know, like, all this kind of data that you're collecting, kind of like things you think could be messages coming through, you're not certain yet. um, it's like data that you're collecting, but then when you have an experience like I did with that house, that's like so validating, that you're like, okay, well, it gives me a little extra boost to trust myself next time, right? Um, so that is automatic writing. So that is a great way to do it. And I have some plans in the future to probably do a full episode just on automatic writing, because it can be done. We can use it for many different reasons that can aid us. But let's shift now to the pendulum. So pendulum is also a good way to allow the guides to have a medium to talk through to you through. So for those who've never used a pendulum before, um, I personally believe that when you get a pendulum, you should try to have a relationship with it. So I've been sleeping with mine. I got this one a couple months ago. I've been sleeping with it under my pillow every night, just so it's near me. The energy is near me. The pendulum is essentially an extension of you. And if you've never worked with one before, you just want to kind of ask it, what does yes look like? And it will usually make some kind of a pattern. And then what does no look like? And then it will make a different kind of pattern. And then once you sort of trust it, then you can start asking it other questions. And at first, when you're first starting out, it's probably a lot of yes and no kind of stuff, but eventually people can get pendulum boards that have letters and symbols on them, and then the pendulum would go to those letters or symbols to help you have more, help you bring through more complex messages. But Pendulum is a really great way to kind of work with the guides and allow them to have a medium to kind of speak through you. Now, another way is through tarot and oracle cards, working with those. So you don't necessarily have to think of this as like a divinatory tool. They're absolutely divinatory tools, but we can also use them for this. And so, what I would recommend if you're going to use tarot or an oracle deck is I would get one that, like, let's say, especially if you're somebody who's pretty good at divining with tarot and you know the 78 cards, you know all their meanings, I would get a deck that you're kind of a little unfamiliar with. And so for me, I ended up getting this deck is called the Psychic Tarot of the Heart by John Holland. And it's actually not even like it doesn't have court cards in it, which is kind of interesting, and it only goes to nines and not all the way to the 10th card of each of the suits. uh, but this deck, it's really about like relationships, and it wasn't necessarily something like an intention that I was working on at the time, but I love the cards. They're very beautiful. I can intuit very much from them, and then they have like one word on the bottom that kind of gives an intention. And so I really like this deck for myself. And so I think everybody has to find one that works for them. But what I liked about it is that I'd never once looked at the book. I just pull a card and then I try to intuit it as a message. And, so like last night, I had I was having a lot of worries about, some of the things that are happening in the world right now. And the card that I pulled, it just said let go. And so it was just telling me and I felt that that was my guides telling me, like, your worries about all this stuff that you can't really control right now isn't helping. So let go, learn how to let go of it. So that is a kind of a fun way to use cards, is just pull one. Maybe if the first one doesn't make sense, pull a second one and just do it every day, but setting that intention that, I'd like to allow this to be a conduit through which my guides can communicate with me. And so that is one method, another method of connecting to guides. And then we talked about this in the beginning, but animal visitors and experiences in nature also can be ways that guides speak to us. So if we have a animal that we frequently see, absolutely that can be a spirit animal, a specific type of guide, but animals can also be ways that other types of guides talk to us. So it can be like showing us presenting a specific animal. It can be, to me, almost like a heads up from the universe, like, I hear you and I see you, and through from our guides as well. I hear you, I see you. You're on the right path. So for me, it's the hummingbird. When the hummingbird shows up, it's a sign that, like, this is part of a path that I'm supposed to be on. Like, I'm on the right path. And this even goes back to like a friend that I recently met, and she always wears a hummingbird like necklace. And when I met her and I kind of saw that, I was like, okay, I think my guides are saying this person is meant to be on this part of my path with me right now. And so kind of watching for that, and that can be a powerful way, a powerful source of comfort, a powerful source of validation when that specific animal shows up for you. So pay attention to, repeating patterns like that, and that also goes for animal imagery too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the physical hummingbird I see, like that friend of mine, her necklace, or like if I see it in the Facebook feed or something like that. To me, that's like always this sort of connection to my guides, because that's a spirit animal of mine. So that, and in addition to other patterns like repeating numbers out in the universe, those can also be ways that guides talk to us. People will often ask me, how do I know what the numbers mean? You don't necessarily need to know what the numbers mean. I think that the numbers can mean something specific to you, but you can also do a little bit of study in numerology just to learn the basic kind of what does 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 mean, and then see when those patterns come through. But those can be very powerful ways that spirit guides will also talk to us. Candle gazing is also a good way to connect to your guides. Oftentimes, when people get into that very, very meditative state of candle gazing, they'll feel that messages come through. Those are messages coming through your guides. You have your clair senses opened up when you're candle gazing, when you're in a really receptive state or space. And then that allows the guides to come through and bring kind of messages to you. Now, when that happens, the messages may come through as thoughts in your head, which again, you will work on your beliefs and your spiritual self-esteem to not be negating those, especially because when you're candle gazing and especially if you've set the intention to talk to a guide, you've already set the intention. So trust that what's coming through is coming from the guide. Um, but other methods, you'll kind of notice like the point of a lot of these methods is to be in an open and a receptive space. So another one is like a guided meditation to connect to your guides. So there's meditations all over the place on the internet. There's not a right or wrong to this. People ask me, which one should I choose? Well, pick one, and if you don't really like the person's voice within the first 20 or 30 seconds, turn it off, pick a different one. You'll kind of know when their voice and the way they're saying things resonates with you, and then just lay down or sit down and meditate and just go through that meditation and see what that does too, because that can be a way for people to connect to a guide that like they've never connected to before, because they're also often going to be prompted to kind of allow that guide to come forth, allow that guide to speak. So that can be a really powerful way too. And then I wanted to mention the synchronicity game, because the synchronicity game to me is one of the best ways to work with your guides. So in the synchronicity game, you are, first of all, open and receptive. So you set your intention, like I intend to receive some communication from my guides today, or a guide today. And then what I would recommend doing is try to have a little bit of unstructured time where you're not really doing anything. You're just kind of letting yourself be in that sort of flow state. The problem is like in the kind of regimented schedule that we have, we restrict our energy by kind of keeping to a schedule that like inevitably we have to, because it's just sort of like the way the modern world works. We've got appointments, there's times when things have to happen. But that also is limiting to the ability of our guides to talk to us when we're in such kind of a regimented space. So if you can set some space where it's very unstructured, and that can be as simple as your spiritual practice every day. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to meditate and do some candle gazing, or I'm going to do candle gazing and draw a card, or I'm going to do a little yoga and draw a card. Like that allows us to have kind of like go into that flow state, have that less structured time. And so you can also expand this out even bigger and say, well, I'm going to take an hour or two and I'm just going to go wandering out in the world. And you can set an intention like a question I want to know an answer to. And then you go out in the world, you just observe what's around, like unusual things that your attention is drawn to, snippets of conversation, a bit of a song on a radio in a passing car, or repeating numbers, animal guides, like seeing the imagery of an animal guide over and over, a certain animal over and over again, or a symbol that repeats itself. And so those are ways that our guides are communicating with us. They're doing it literally all the time, like literally all the time. And we're not seeing much of it. But when we play the synchronicity game, we're setting the intention that I'm going to see it all, and then you're going to actually start seeing more of it. And the more you do this, the more you'll begin to see. And that's really how I've strengthened my ability to communicate with my guides, is through, setting that belief, or working on my self-belief, kind of eradicating some of those self-doubts, and then kind of playing this synchronicity game and just being open all the time to like imagery and symbols and patterns around me. And then I think too, is that we should talk about like the frequency upgrade. It's a fancy way of saying, improve your health, all aspects of your health. Because if we're not getting enough sleep, if we're not eating the right kinds of foods, we're eating a lot of like foods that are full of preservatives and chemicals and things that weigh the body down. if we are not getting enough movement, if we're not doing enough self-care, all of this is going to impede the ability to connect. So it's much harder to connect when you're not taking care of yourself. So, I've had people over the years kind of come to me and they want to connect to guides. And then when I start asking them questions, they're like, not hardly ever sleeping, not getting enough sleep, maybe drinking a lot, and kind of self-medicating, like doing these kind of self-soothing things. They're trying to feel better, but what it's really doing is just sort of weighing their energy down. So really kind of ask yourself and be honest with yourself, like, where am I at with my physical health? Where am I at with my mental health and my emotional health? And that's going to be a barometer for where I'm at with my spiritual health. So it's kind of like the chakra system, is that we don't usually start up here. We start all the way at the bottom, and you work with the root and the sacral chakra and the solar plexus. So that's where most of our blockages are. And what many people will find is they start working on the chakras that are in the body, and they don't actually ever really have to work with the third eye and the crown, because all of it sort of just opens up and expands more when we're working on the lower chakras. So I can't say enough about, kind of frequency upgrade. You raise your vibration through doing good things for your physical, spiritual, or your physical, mental, and emotional health, and that will supercharge your spiritual gifts as well. So, take home message here. My best advice is, set an intention that you're gonna do this. So you're gonna do it for real, and you're gonna connect to your guides. You're gonna work with them, and you're gonna get good at it. And then learn how to trust, and try some of these examples that I gave today, and see what results come. And what you may find is that as you do more and more and more of it, you're just going to feel more confident. Your spiritual self-esteem is going to increase, and pretty soon, you'll be communicating, connecting with your guides. But also managing your expectations, like going back to my story about Ralph. I still want to connect more to him. I'm starting to understand when he's there, and I believe he was probably the one who told me about the house and everything. But it's not like I can see him. It's not like he's constantly talking to me. It's like I do have to still put in the effort. So just kind of managing our expectations about that, and being open and receptive to how this is going to work. So, and then finally, I would say, kind of doing some shadow work, working through our limiting beliefs. Who told you, where did the messages come from not to trust ourselves, or that this stuff isn't real, or, and you'll likely trace it all the way back to like your childhood, but starting to work through some of that as well. And so for those who are interested in, diving deeper into shadow work, we do have our Shadow Seekers membership. We're opening up near the end of August, early September, again, taking the next round of members. So there we do chakra balancing and shadow work, and with the end hope and result that we deepen our spirituality and our connection to the divine, and hopefully hear from our guides a little bit more. And people who are in our membership will tell you, like, you get in there, you work on some of this stuff, and a lot of other things start opening up. So it really is like an alchemical process. So that is our presentation tonight about guides and how to connect to them. So I see there's some comments in here, so I'm going to get back in here and kind of answer some questions. But we got the Q&A now. If you're with us live, feel free to leave questions. Doesn't have to be about spirit guides. Can be anything related to witchcraft, shadow work, and energy work. I've got a couple questions here that I'm going to answer. But that gives those of you who are with us live, gives you some time. Those of you who are watching in replay, you can leave questions too. I go back later in the chat and I'll answer them. Or if I think they're questions that would be relevant to a larger number of people, I'll feature them in the next episode. So Melinda had said, she said, I have that question a lot. She said, trying to tell the difference between a thought and an actual message. Yeah. And so, the best thing to do is, like, I think as you work through this more, it'll become more and more clear what is and what isn't an actual thought. I would be lying if I didn't say I still struggle with that too. Did it come from a guide? Is it me? But you just kind of remind yourself, like, it's not helpful to like have that wavering thing, but and that kind of back and forth. But it's a work in progress, right? And just kind of notice like if there's any difference in the way the thought sounds, if the perspective changes, or if it's a thought that just kind of pops in there out of nowhere. That's another indication that it's from them, because it's not like following the natural kind of train of thought that you're in. Cindy said she loves candle gazing, and has had a lot of success with it. Adam said he wakes up at 5:30 every day for some reason, no alarm, just wake up at the same time. Very good. A lot of people would be very envious, because many people have to like have the alarm to get up. I mean, I hope 5:30 is good for you. I guess if you go to bed early enough, but it sounds like maybe you're not getting enough sleep. I don't know. Depends on when you go to bed, but could be a variety of reasons that a person would wake up at a specific time. And then I think what you just want to do then is sort of like count backwards and figure out how many hours you actually need, so you know when you need to go to bed to get that many, if that's always going to be the time that your body's just naturally waking up. Okay, so I have a question from Samantha, and she is curious about releasing negative emotions without manifesting them back to us. She said, how do we release negative emotions without manifesting it back to us? And since I did the Chiron Dark Moon ritual, she's a member of our Shadow Seekers, and that was a ritual we did earlier this month. She said, a lot of things have been coming up, and I want to make sure that I am healing instead of spiraling. Yeah, so there's always that kind of worry that when the things that are coming up that are difficult for us, like, are we in a downward spiral, or is this just part of the work? Are we just kind of working through it? Because, we don't really evolve if life is super, super easy. We evolve when there are challenges that force us to step up and learn lessons and achieve things that might have been part of our soul contract. So I think that, where the question comes from is sort of this idea of energetic return, and, this idea of like attracts like. And from this perspective, if you kind of think about it, when you release something, if the energy, it's not like you release it and then it attracts it back to you. That wouldn't be what I would imagine when I think about kind of like attracts like. It's more like, if you release it, it should facilitate more releasing. So like if the energy gets compounded, it's just going to facilitate more releasing. And to me, that can't really be a bad thing. So I don't believe that doing releasing is going to bring bad things back to you. So just, you could clear your mind of that. I wouldn't be concerned about that. Now, what I do think is probably happening, and this goes for everybody, Chiron is going to be retrograde on Friday, and it's going to be retrograde all the way to the end of the year. Now, Chiron is the wounded healer in the astrological chart. It can indicate a place where we have a wound that we kind of brought into this life, that we have the potential to heal. And just like Chiron, who, he was mortally wounded, but because he was half God, he couldn't die. He then spent the remainder of his life on earth kind of searching for a remedy, and through doing that, he became this gifted healer who healed everybody else. So the idea behind the Chiron is that if you can figure out what your wound is and you can heal it, then you have the potential to heal other people because you went through it yourself. And so uh, so where was I kind of lost my train of thought for a second, but to get back to the retrograde. When Chiron is in retrograde, that highlights all of this. So it's not going to surprise me at all if people are starting to feel like kind of scabs coming off, or wounds kind of opening, things like that, because it is time for us to work on these things if we want to. Like, that's essentially what the retrograde is giving us, is the space to work on this stuff if you want to. Now, it doesn't mean that if you don't work on it now, you can never work on it, because there will be another retrograde again. They tend to happen every couple of years or so when it comes to Chiron, but this is a space when you can work on it. So So what I would say for Samantha is, a lot of stuff is coming up. It makes sense to me because of where we are in this period of time. So this is going to be a prime time for your shadow work around whatever's opening up for you. Kind of notice, like, if it feels like a lot of things are happening that maybe feel negative, try to see if you can notice any patterns in them, because that will be an indication of something that you can work on. And the universe is going to send us challenges to kind of help us move through this. So it doesn't always feel good when we're in it, but like I said, it's going to be good when you're done with it, because you will come out on the other side. You're going to be stronger, and you're going to be able to move more fully forward on your path. So what else would I say to her is, like, to Samantha and to anybody who's kind of going through this, is just reach out to people. Make sure you have support. Make sure you're doing your self-care, especially if it seems like a lot is going on. I told the story during, we actually had a workshop on retrogrades in our Shadow Seekers membership over the weekend, and I told the story of, like, my Saturn, when Saturn was retrograde last year. Saturn's another big one, like, because it's the teacher of life's lessons. When Saturn goes retrograde, it tends to open up space for us to kind of work through stuff, but when we're in it, it feels like a lot is going on. And so for me last year, I had to quit my job during it, and it was a big decision to make, and it just seemed like everything went chaotic and crazy, and the person I worked for was threatening to sue me and all kinds of stuff. But once I stood my ground, and I got through it, and everything worked out the way I wanted it to. And then the retrograde was over, but it really made it so much easier now for me to have the confidence in my career. Now that I have to raise my rates for my tutoring students, I feel much more confident being able to do that because I worked through that big thing last year. So, just know that it on the other side it gets better, but in the meantime, lots of self-care, getting support. Samantha's in our Shadow Seekers membership, so reach out in the group or reach out to me, if you need help. And that goes for everybody. Reach out to somebody, if you feel like a lot is going on during this time, because we are in Chiron retrograde and it can bring up a lot of stuff for people. But I wouldn't worry, Samantha, about, like, attracting bad stuff through releasing. It should only really facilitate more releasing. Okay, so I hope that helps. And then Melinda had a question about limiting beliefs, which is really good, because of, like, we kind of talked a little bit about limiting beliefs tonight. So this is very relevant to us. So she said that love has always meant that she had to change something about herself, to be worthy to keep that person's love. And she said, I'd change who I am to keep that person loving me. And she said, is there something I can do, a ritual or a practice that will help me release this belief and make space for love in my life? So good question. And I'm sure people can relate specifically to this question, but also you may be able to relate to just, like, having a limiting belief that's not leaving space, right? So like anything, you can always do a letting go ritual. So, like, write down the limiting belief on a piece of paper at the dark moon, burn it. If that doesn't do it again on the next dark moon. I do this over and over every single dark moon. I write down the limiting beliefs that I'm still carrying on a piece of paper. I kind of charge the piece of paper, or I might meditate on it. Kind of imagine, you can even imagine your mind's eye visualizing what life would look like if you were free of the limiting belief, and then you burn it. And do that over and over and over again, and that can be really good. A cord cutting can also be good. People sometimes think cord cutting's only for, like, people, but you can absolutely cord cut a limiting belief too. So you can imagine that you are, you know, you have that cord connecting you to something, to that limiting belief, and just imagine in your mind's eye just severing it with to use a selenite athame in my mind, but you can use anything you want to sever that connection. So I think that, and you can actually do a physical one too. Like, I've done ones where I've tied, like, a cord around me and then, like, cut it off too. Like, I'm just going to sever that energy from me. And, but what you also want to do is you want to kind of delve into, where does it come from? What's the origin of this? Where did it come from? Who was the first person who taught you that love was conditional? So kind of trace that back. Likely that's going back into childhood. Most of the time it does for us. And then figure out a way to energetically kind of cut yourself from that energy. And it doesn't mean to have to cut yourself from that person necessarily, but at least cut yourself from the energy. Like I'm not gonna stay attached to this energy of this person who sort of taught me that I had to work for love. And and so I'll just briefly tell this story. Like my first boyfriend was very emotionally abusive, and I didn't really realize it till nearer the end. But it was a very tumultuous relationship through most of it, and he was always harping on me about the way I looked and the way I dressed, and and it didn't suit him enough, and I was too scary, or he would tell me to tone it down, if I looked too goth or whatever. He would buy me clothing from J. Crew. Nothing wrong with J. Crew, but not my style, and he would try to give it to me. And and in the beginning, I would comply because I was very young and I didn't know I liked this person. I didn't want to lose him, and so, but eventually I was sort of able to trace it back to growing up, like where I was always different and I was always dressed different than other people. Growing up where I grew up, um, in Indiana with a cornfield in the backyard. It was just like I looked a lot different. Acted a lot different, and so I had to like sort of try to fit in all the time. And so it went back to that. And so why am I me trying to keep this guy loving me is me trying to keep everybody around me loving me because I feel so weird and so different. And so once we can kind of break through some of that, that opens up the space to let go of the limiting beliefs. But you don't need to change anything unless you want to change it. So like if it's something you want to change, 100% change for the better. But if it's something that somebody else wants you to change, you know, really kind of think about, where does the limiting belief come from that I need to change in the first place? And the people who really truly love you will never ask you to change. They'll love you for who you are. I mentioned this, like, it just popped into my head here, but I said this like a long time ago and it kind of upset people, but there's some truth to it, is that like, many people, you don't really know who loves you until like everybody's done their shadow work. Because if somebody can truly love you, like in spite of once all the shadow work's been done, and for exactly who you are, then you know that that's real love. But definitely, Melinda, reach out to me if you want to talk more about it. But I would say to try to kind of write those limiting beliefs down every dark moon and just burn them and just see if you can get rid of all of that. Okay, let me see if there's any other things in the chat. So Adam said he wakes up at 5:30 no matter what time he goes to sleep. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would ask myself too, is like, are you getting enough sleep? So if somebody who's waking up at 5:30, there's no right or wrong number of hours that a person should get. I think it's unique to each and every person, but try to figure out, like, do you feel awake enough when you wake up? And then if you don't, then see if there's a way to go to bed a little bit earlier, because sleep is really important. It's something I'm working big time on. It really does shift how we connect to the world spiritually when we're getting enough rest. Kurt said, do I have an update when we're going to open our coven, joining the coven? So we are going to be, so this is a question only for those who are into demystifying witchcraft. Currently, the coven is closed to only those people and the people who are taking that course. But yes, I think we're planning to have a planning meeting early August, and we're thinking the initiation will be early September. And so we'll be writing very soon and setting up a meeting where everybody can come on Zoom who's interested, and we'll talk through that, and we're going to plan out the initiation. But for those who are interested in joining our coven, eventually we do have a course, Demystifying Witchcraft, that is going to be open up to the public in a couple of weeks, I believe, and that those who take that course then become eligible to join our coven eventually if they would like to. So just, those who are interested can look for more information on that in the future. And Kelly said acceptance is a major need for most of us. Yeah, totally, to be accepted by those around us. So it can be, it can set up a lot of limiting beliefs in our world, or in our personal world because of that. Because we want to be accepted so bad, but eventually we learn how to kind of stand in our own power, decide if the change is something we really want to make, like that clothing change was not a change I wanted to make. And like I said, I mentioned I made it a short term, and then I kind of went back to being who I was, and I got a lot of like negative feedback from that boyfriend. There's a reason he's not a boyfriend anymore. So so anyway, so let me just mention a little bit about what's coming up before we sign off. If anybody has any other questions, let me know while we've got time here in the chat. So on 7:30, that's next Tuesday, I'm going to be doing a episode on Lunaza Magic. It's episode 100. I can't even believe it's been 100 episodes. And then on 8/6, the following Tuesday, I'm going to do an episode on the Lionsgate portal. Both of these are big, big time for prosperity and abundance. So we're going to be talking a lot about prosperity and abundance over the next month, because this is the time of the wheel when those energies are most prominent. On 8/8, we are going to have a ritual for prosperity, our Lunaza Lionsgate ritual for prosperity. All those who are in our coven and our Shadow Seekers membership, they're all of you are invited. You have a ticket. It's part of your membership. But those who are not in one of those two groups can absolutely join us. Watch for some posts in the group in the next week or so. As we get closer to 8/8, we'll be posting how you can join us through just a donation. You'll be able to get a ticket that way. This is a big ritual. Like for me, whatever I set, whatever intention I set during this ritual, usually comes true in my personal life. And so I'm going to be sharing with you how we do all that. We're going to set some intentions and just really pull in some big, big, abundant energy while the space of the universe is open for it. And then, of course, like I mentioned, Demystifying Witchcraft is our course on the foundations of witchcraft. That's going to be opening up, I'm hoping, by the very beginning of August for to take in, the next group of people who want to take that course. And then our Shadow Seekers membership is going to be opening up near the end of August, early September. All right, so I don't see any other comments here, so I'm going to sign off. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Good luck connecting to your guides. I'd love to hear back if you try any of the strategies in here. You try anything, let me know how it works, if it doesn't work, or let me know how you like to connect to your guides. If you like what you hear, leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the video. It helps us get it out in the feed of more people. And then... and also, if you're watching back in replay, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, Body, Mind, Witchcraft, and that way you'll never miss an episode in the future. All right, until next time, blessed be.